Good evening, everyone. All content shared, displayed, or otherwise presented during this meeting, including but not limited to sorority manuals, ceremonial rituals, and other materials that contain Delta's trademarks, copyrights, or other intellectual property is owned and controlled by Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated and is protected by law. Participants shall not photograph, video record, screen capture, or otherwise copy Delta materials to modify or reproduce for personal or third-party use. Participant further understands, agrees, and acknowledges to be solely liable for any damages in law or inequity resulting from violation of applicable laws and shall be subject to disciplinary action according to the member code of conduct and other related agreement. Just want to go over the 3 W's from the emergency response team. Always wear a cloth covering over your nose and mouth. Wait 6 feet apart, avoid close contact, and wash your hands or use hand sanitizer.
Great evening, SARS, community members, community leaders, and friends. I am Dr. Patty Sanders Smith, president of the Pitt County Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority. I also had the pleasure of serving as president of the Historically Black Colleges and Universities Coalition of Pitt County. Once again, organizations across Eastern North Carolina have agreed to collaborate as we prepare for the 2022 elections. We have learned it will take all of us working together to get the vote out if we have any hopes of saving our democracy. All the organizations in this group are nonpartisan and understand that we cannot endorse or support any political party or candidate. However, we can provide information to assure we have informed citizens who understand why their vote is so important. Tonight in the audience, we have elected officials at both the state and local levels. We have leadership from political parties and candidates seeking local, state, and federal offices. Realizing voter education is also an important need in our communities. Tonight will be the beginning of a series of events which will be held throughout our communities during this election season. We thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedules to participate tonight. We trust you will find the sessions enlightening and very informative. It is my pleasure to introduce you Mrs. Christy Davis Uwa, Pitt County Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Social Action Committee Chairperson, who will give you tonight's purpose. Sarah Davis Uwa.
Thank you, Sarah, President. Good evening, everyone. I am Christy Davis Uwa, the Social Action Chair for Pitt County Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. It is my pleasure to welcome everyone to Pitt County Alumni Chapter's Redistricting Workshop. The purpose for tonight is to have a discussion on redistricting and highlight the laws surrounding voting. I would encourage you to listen closely to receive information on what is redistricting, what is happening in North Carolina, how does it affect you and your family, what is gerrymandering, why and how you should get involved in your community. Next slide, please. Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated National Social Action Initiatives are the Delta Days at the nation's capital. This is the sorority's annual legislative conference held in Washington, D.C. for the purpose of increasing members' involvement in the national public policy making process. In addition, the Delta Days at the United Nations was established to educate and raise awareness of global issues and international policy. Lastly, the national social action priorities are the educational disparities and inequalities, redistricting and voter suppression, supporting gender equality, health equality, combating racial profiling, and DC statehood. So before I pass the mic to my sorority sister, Whitney Kimball, I would like to share some ground rules for tonight. Please make sure your microphone is on mute, so therefore the background noise can be kept to a minimum. Adjust your video layout to the speaker view, as well as type your questions in the chat, so I will read your question during the Q&A section or part of the PowerPoint. Yes, as well as all attendees, please put your name, and if you are affiliated with the organization, please put that in the chat as well. Later on in the presentation, we will do a program evaluation that will be placed in the chat. So I'll let you, or I will notify you whenever that comes around. Lastly, the recording will be shared on the Pitt County Alumni Chapter website within 1 week of this presentation.
Hello and good evening, everyone. My name is Whitney Tarver Kimball, and I'm a soror with Pitt County Alumni Chapter. And I have the honor of presenting to you our guest speaker, Mr. Val Atkinson. He is an educator, a radio host, columnist, and author. His show can be found on several channels, WFXC, WFXK, Foxy 107, 104. He also has a bi-weekly column entitled A Peace of Mind. He's a former adjunct instructor at several universities in our system, and he is a proud Eagle by way of North Carolina Central University, and he is a life member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated, part of the D9 family. It has been an honor and a privilege to work with Mr. Atkinson over the last month, gathering this information, and we just really appreciate you. And go ahead and take it over, Mr. Atkinson.
Well, thank you so much, Whitney, for that very kind introduction. And let me begin by saying to President and Dr. Patty Saunders Smith, the officers and members of the Pitt County Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, I'd like to say thank you for extending an invitation to me to participate in this very important workshop. And in keeping with tradition, I must take this opportunity to bring you greetings from the other Crimson and Cream Panhellenic Council member, the Durham Alumni Chapter of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. And to all other Divine Nine members present, as well as the many others in attendance this evening, I say without exception, thanks for the invitation and greetings to you all. There's a disclaimer that I must share before I get started in our presentation for this evening. And it goes, my remarks are not intended to be representative of the positions or opinions of the Pitt County Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. My remarks have been derived from personal research, writings, and opinions previously shared with my radio and podcast listeners and readers of my columns, articles, and books. So let's get right to it. Redistricting, what is it? Well, it's really a three-step process. The decennial census is the first step. The decennial census is conducted every 10 years, all years ending in 0. The second step is reapportionment. Reapportionment occurs after the census results have been received by the president, after which the president is then required to forward the results to the Congress. The court then sends the results to each state, alerting them as to how many seats they will have in the House of Representatives during the next Congress. And the third and final step is redistricting. That's what we hear most about. Redistricting is defined colloquially as redrawing the lines. That's what we hear about mostly. The legislature of the various states then redistricts its congressional maps based on the numbers received from the decennial census and the reapportionment clerk. Most state legislatures redistrict their states and local districts as well. Some say this is tantamount to having candidates choose their own voters. it may be a little easier to recall the 3-step process if we think of them in terms of what happens in each step. In the decennial census, the steps determine who is counted. Now this is very important because during what we call the census research, we found that some people wanted to insert another piece of information into the census that wasn't there before, that had to do with citizenship. And the purpose for that was hoping that some people who was not sure that they should say who was living in their home, not sure how many family members were fully citizens or here legally, maybe they wouldn't even participate at all, thereby pushing down the actual legal count of how many people we have in each sub-district and each state. Now, that's very important because we use census data to determine how much money each state's going to get. It's not just about the business of how many representatives you're going to have in Congress, but money is involved here, and that's always important in the society we live in, always important. The next step, reapportionment, uses the census to determine the size of the districts. We have a formula, total population divided by 435. That gives you what we call the PDP, the person per district. That means that's the number of people you authorize in the House of Representatives. We here in North Carolina picked up one district during this past census. We now are authorized 14, and we'll talk about that a little later. Under redistricting, also called gerrymandering, it uses geographic and demographic software to shape the districts. But there are some rules. There should be more, but there are some rules. The districts have to be compact as much as possible. They must be contiguous. That means you can't have most of your districts in Pitt County with a sliver in Wake County and even more in Mecklenburg. That won't work. They all must touch one another. And that's why we have funny looking districts. And we're getting to the meaning of gerrymandering in just a second. In addition to contiguousness, the districts must have population equity. We're talking about the Congress here now. We're not talking about state and local redistricting. We're talking about federal redistricting. And it says there must be population equity. Must be population equity in terms of having the same amount of people in each district where necessary. And finally, racial and language minority protections. If there are some issues involving racial and language minorities that can be, they should be protected. Back in 1991, the census was being used to determine if North Carolina could have what we call a majority minority district. That's where the majority of the people in this district are what we call minority. That means non-white in this particular case. So I was with the Democratic Party at that time, and we did some things to try to ensure that we had representation in the Congress. We hadn't had anybody since George H. White was a member of Congress in 1901. So we were anxious to see that happen. We sent the paperwork to Washington. President George H.W. Bush was president at that time. And he had his Justice Department to send things back and say, we believe that North Carolina should not have a majority minority district, but that they should have two. And we were excited. We were elated. They're going to give us two majority minority districts. Some of us did not understand at that time that we were about to be engaged in something called packing, where you put all of certain kinds of people in one district then those people can't help out neighboring candidates to win their races. They'll say, we'll give you the 1st and 12th congressional district, but you won't be able to help out anybody in the 5th or the 3rd. Well, we've learned our lesson from that, and we understand exactly what that means, and we're not playing that game anymore. The current status, what is it right now, and how did we get to be where we are? The reason redistricting is needed is because one of our federal legislative houses is based on population. And the population is constantly changing. This begs the question, why do we have a house based on population? Why don't we just have one house that's based on equal representation? Well, it started with the appeasement of slaveholding states to keep them interested in joining the Union. So we came up with something called a bicameral legislature, where we have one house that's equal and another house that's based on population. And we've been doing things like redistricting and appeasing Southern people ever since. In 1792, the number of representatives for the House was set at 105. Starting in 1911 and finishing in 1929, the number was increased to 435, where it stands today. States are authorized a number of representatives based on our redistricting formula, which basically says that the total population, which we're going to get from the census, is divided by the voting members of the House, 435. That way we determine how many people are in each district. For an example, this last census told us that a little over 331 million Americans, or people rather, would equal to 761,000 people per district. So that's the number we use. 761,168 people make up one district. And I said people, not citizens, because that's the way we count for redistricting, people. That's why everybody needs to stand up and be counted when you talk about redistricting. And for those of you out there who are taking notes, and I know you are, I want you to put a star beside the demographic projections from 2010 and 2020 centennial censuses, because we're going to come back to that and talk about how that's affecting us and our vote today. Again, we go back to why is redistricting really necessary? We've already talked about equality of representation. Over a period of 10 years, population changed, sometimes dramatically. Gains and losses in state population in 2020 made it so that Texas, Colorado, Florida, Montana, North Carolina, and Oregon gained seats. Texas gained 2. But to keep things even, somebody's got to lose. So therefore, we had 7 states that lost a seat. California, Illinois, Michigan, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia lost 1 each. But they can gain seats as well, as was seen by Texas and North Carolina. So what's wrong with this whole thing called redistricting? It's got some problems. Few people understand it. In my most recent book, my last book, entitled The Electoral College and the Black and Brown Vote, the survey that we conducted revealed that less than 25% of the subjects surveyed demonstrated a working knowledge and understanding of the redistricting process. Now that wasn't surprising, but it was disappointing, because over 50% of the subjects in our survey were college graduates. That is problematic. So we looked at gerrymandering. Gerrymandering itself has become the norm. Court cases have confirmed legislators' right to gerrymander districts as long as race is not used as a condition of the gerrymandering process. They've learned how to get around that. So let's look at some dictionary definitions. I like to do that. Gerrymandering refers to political manipulation of electoral district boundaries with the intent of creating undue advantage for a party, group, or socioeconomic class within the constituency. A gentleman by the name of Governor Elbridge Gerry started this whole mess when he was governor of Massachusetts. And he drew some district lines, well, he approved some district lines drawn by others that looked like a salamander. And people start putting that together. And they named it gerrymandering. So that's how we get the name gerrymandering, but that's what it means. When we first had our 12th congressional district here in North Carolina, it looked like what some people would call the Aleutian Island chain. It meandered its way from Charlotte all the way to Greensboro. Sometimes it was only as wide as I-85. But we did it. That was called gerrymandering, and some people accepted that. The politicization of the process has threatened the essence of the democratic polity that the process purports to defend. Now, in plain English, what that means is, in a democracy, voters choose their political leaders. When you have a system that allows candidates and political leaders to choose their own voters, I don't know what you call it, but it surely is not democracy. So if that's the case, what are the alternatives? What are we doing about it? Anybody can bring up a problem, but few can say, here's some things we can do. There are 14 states that have some form of redistricting commissions that help with the redistricting process and supposedly makes it more fair. 7 other states don't redistrict at all because they're too small. They have less than the numbers we quoted earlier, the 761,000 people. So their whole state is a district. So you don't need to be about redistricting. And just so you're wondering who those states are, if my memory serves me, I believe it's Vermont. And then we come down and we get states like Delaware and Washington, D.C., which is considered to be a state based on the 23rd Amendment. It's considered to be a state. So Vermont, Delaware, Washington, D.C., then we move over and pick up places like Wyoming and North Dakota and South Dakota and Alaska. Those are the places that don't redistrict at all because they don't have enough numbers. They don't have enough numbers, and there's not a lot you can do about that. That leaves 30 states that give us the state legislature, that gives the state legislature the right to draw the lines unabated. But at least 29 of them are subject to their governor's veto. That leaves just 1 that doesn't give veto rights to their governor. And now the same state that doesn't allow their governor to present any executive level oversight or checks and balances on the legislative branch's redistricting rights wants the Supreme Court to rule that the remaining branch of state government, the judiciary branch, should have no oversight or perform no checks and balances on the legislative branch's redistricting rights as well. This would raise the state legislature above the oversight and checks and balances mantra of American government at all levels. Bet you can't guess which state we're talking about. I'll give you its initials. Its initials is North Carolina. That's the state that the governor does not have veto power over this. And The legislature is going to the courts right now to get them to make sure that the judiciary can't do anything. Good old North Carolina. Well, we'll talk about that in a little bit, because right now we got to talk about some fixes. No need in bringing up problems if you can't do anything about it. Number one, I would say rewriting Section 4B of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. If some of you will recall in Shelby County v. Holder, the ruling that the Supreme Court made that really gutted the 1965 Voting Rights Act, the specificity was that 4B was unconstitutional. Section 4B of that act really talks about who comes under the auspices of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. And it used the year 1964. If in 1964, over 50% of your voting age population in your state or political subdivision was not registered to vote, then you came under the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Or if you had 50 plus 1% that was registered to vote, but more than 50% did not turn out to vote, you also came under the auspices of that act. Now, if you do away with 4B, then nobody can determine who's under the control of the act. So now Section 5, which has all of the teeth of pre-clearance, doesn't work. So now you can't pre-clear anybody. When pre-clearing was the king of the hill, that means that anybody who wanted to talk about voter ID or moving precincts or combining precincts or cutting out same-day registration and voting, they couldn't do that without getting permission from the Justice Department or a 3-judge panel in Washington. It was called pre-clearance. Now pre-clearance is gone. So those people that participate in voter suppression can't wait to go ahead and inject draconian measures in their laws, in their state laws, to say what you can't do and how you will behave and who can't give anybody something to drink or eat while they're standing in line. And by the time we take it through the court system now, some of those draconian measures have already been instituted and the results may have already been implemented from that election. So pre-clearance is critically important, or it was. Now, when the court enacted, set down their decision, they also said that Section 4B of the 1965 Voting Rights Act should be rewritten. Hadn't been done yet. We're hoping, but in order to do something like that, you got to have control of Congress, both houses. And you need the president to sign it, unless you can have 2/3 majority in both houses. So that hadn't happened. And what some call the granddaddy fixer of them all, and I'm on the side of this one, is a constitutional amendment. But if it's hard to win back the Congress, you know, constitutional amendment is no easy thing. You need 2/3 of both houses and 3/4 of the states in order to ratify a constitutional amendment. So that's not an easy thing to do. We're talking about possibilities here. Talking about possibilities here. Now, also we can talk about probabilities as well. But what's lurking in the wings we need to take into consideration before we decide what to do. In the decision to allow North Carolina have its Supreme Court to say okay to the redrawing of the lines by the court panel, 6-3 decision, Judge Alito was given the responsibility to come up with the dissenting piece in this decision. And it's only a couple sentences and I'll read it to you. He says, in my view, the applicants have shown that the question presented by this case easily satisfied our user criteria for certiorari. And it's also likely that they would prevail on the merits if review were granted. The elections clause provides that rules governing the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives must be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. So he's already showing his hand, and he's already saying that, I'll tell you what, guys, if you just send it back up, I think it has a good chance of passing. If this case is decided as Alito thinks it should be, would it mean that the other states would have to follow North Carolina's lead in disallowing the governor's veto? That's something I want you guys to ponder. Now, what are the dates? Let's talk about putting things in people's hands. What can we do? When? Where do things stand? Last date for registration, folks, you need to write this down if you don't already have it. April 22nd, 2022. If you're not registered, get registered. If you know somebody that's not registered, get them registered. Primary voting date, May 17th, 2022. And the all-important general election, November the 8th of 2022. You and everybody you know needs to go to the poll and be ready to cast your vote at that time. Now, we'll be voting for 14 congressional districts. There are some who say that this map that we are using now means that 7 people should be elected as Republicans, 6 as Democrats, and 1 district up for grabs. I disagree. I've studied this quite a bit, and I think it's more like 7-5 with 2 districts up for grabs. The districts that we are talking about are 5, and I'll just name them to you: districts 1, 2, 4, 6, and 12. Those are the 5 districts that should be won by Democrats. Now, we got a new district 14. I believe that districts 13 and 14 are going to be up for grabs. And just having your attention just for a moment, I'll tell you what the boundaries are of that 13th district. The 13th district covers the southern half of Wake County, all of Johnston County, the western half of Wayne County, and also the northeastern portion of Harnett County. I live in that district. I know these people. And that is not a toss-up, ladies and gentlemen. I'll tell you, it is not a toss-up. The other toss-up is maybe a little clearer. That is the new 14th district, which will cover the southern half of Mecklenburg County and, of course, the eastern half of Gaston County. That will take into effect the new 14th district. It busts itself up against the 12th district, which is represented now by Congressperson Alma Adams. So I see it 7-5-2. I hope it is 7-6-1, but we'll see how that works. Procedures and laws. We talked about majority-minority districts, and we talked a little bit about packing. We didn't talk about splitting too much because the timing purpose, but the quintessential splitting was last time, when the Republican legislature drew a line almost evenly dissecting the campus of North Carolina A&T State University. And people had no idea, some of them didn't, which precinct they were supposed to go to, which district they were in. That wasn't a mistake. That was done on purpose. That's a whole part of what we call voter suppression. It's called splitting. You split up the vote, and sometimes you pack it. You pack it in so those left non-white people can't help some people in other districts. Happens all the time. Some of the laws that you need to be aware of are amendments you need to really know. 14, 15, 17, 19, 23. We won't go into them. Most of you know what they are, but you need to be aware of what they are. Court decisions, critically important here. There are 4 that I listed: Citizens United, Shelby v. Holder, Ruco v. Common Cause, Chiavallo v. Washington. Of all of those, they have to do with voting. They have to do with the electoral process. But of all of them, the critical and most important happened on June 25th, 2013, Shelby v. Holder, when they actually killed the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Killed it, buried it. Keep that in mind. Ruco v. Common Cause, another case that happened right here in the state of North Carolina, was handed down on June 27th of 2019, when they ruled that gerrymandering was legal. They ruled that legislatures could not redistrict based on race, but they could based on political advantage. So right there in the literature, it says that if you got the power and you want the gerrymander to keep the power, it's okay to do that. Got to stay up with these decisions, folks, to know what's going on. And of course, one of the others handed down March 7th, when the Supreme Court ruled that the North Carolina Supreme Court decision stands. That gave us the map that we are dealing with today. What can be done? We talked about rewriting Section 4B and a constitutional amendment, but let's talk about not what can be done, but what is probable. Let's talk about participation, voter registration, and GOTV. Voter registration is within our grasp. We all can register to vote. We all can go out and vote. And ladies, especially ladies of color, I know you shared the burden of people saying that Joe Biden owes his career to you, and a lot of other people have done some things, and without you, we wouldn't be where we are. But I'm going to ask one more favor of you. You always go to people who are burdened. I need you to help me get some of my brothers out to vote that don't normally vote. And I know some of you hear their suits and you heard their requests. I want you to start asking them some questions. When they come up to you and talk about the things they want to do with you, ask them if they're registered to vote. And if they say, yeah, ask them where their precinct is located. Ask them where do they go to register to vote. And when they say they'll meet you for a date or a dinner, ask them if they know where their local board of elections is. That's where you want to meet them. Do that for us, ladies. Put pressure on them. Tell them you like their nice shiny car and their brand new suit, but you'd like them much, much better if they got a tab on their lapel saying, I voted. Tell them it's their time now to step up. Well, that's going to do it for me, folks. I know you got some questions, and that's what I'm here for. Thank you so much for affording me the time, Dr. Smith. I am at your beck and call. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Atkinson, for your great presentation. It was very educated and informational. And so that pretty much concludes our presentation at this time. So we're going to move forward to the Q&A portion of it. If you have any questions for the presenter, please put it in the chat so I'm able to read it out to him so he can answer your questions. So some of the questions that came in the chat, the first question is, how will the current map impact this year's election?
I think that's a great question. And it's about the business of knowing what the courts have really said. And one of the things the court used as a decision maker was how much time would there have been left for the up and coming primary election. So it said to the folks who were in dissent that if you want to draw lines again after this election of 2022, feel free to do so. So what most people are saying about the map that we have now, that it is good for 2022, but don't bank on it going forward.
The next question says, explain the criteria or guidelines for drawing congressional maps.
We talked about that when we talked about the compactness, when we talked about contiguousness, population equity, and racial and language minority protections. There are some others, but those are the main criteria that's used for drawing the lines. And they've input their software with these types of measures to ensure, and they already know by your address how many registered Republicans and Democrats you have in your household, what the voting record is, and those kinds of things. So they send messages through the software to pick out all Democratic voters within a 50-mile radius that are positive voters, meaning they vote most of the time. And that's how they get this information. But now what happens is, if you're on the other side and you don't think that the lines were drawn properly, now this is where the law comes in and it's very important. If you don't think the lines are drawn properly, pre-clearance is not there to protect you anymore. So you can go to the courts and you can file, but the election and the issues that the lines created will go on. So if you think that there's the compactness was not taken in consideration at all, well, they'll take the idea to the court, but in the meantime, the election goes on and probably the results of the election is made and somebody takes office that shouldn't be in office. And that's what happened when they killed Section 5.
We have a question in the chat box as well.
Is it better to vote by mail or go stand in line to vote? So the same day voting.
That's a personal choice. What you have to do, I feel, is make the decision based on what your capabilities are. If you have some issues that you know would not be really amenable for you standing in line for a long period of time because of health reasons or whatever, then you should take the other option. But whatever you do, make sure you have a backup, make sure you have people that you can depend upon to help you out, that you can call and they can come and be of help to you in those circumstances. I always felt like the earlier you vote, the better, because early voting allows you to make changes if there's been a mistake or make corrections if you need to because of time. Don't have a system where you're depending upon that last minute and that you like the camaraderie that you experience by standing in long lines. That's not the purpose of this process. So I would say vote early, take in consideration your personal needs and do what you need to do to get in line or send your ballots in early.
We have two, one from Teresa Roach and then Brenda Jones.
Yes, before we go to the next question, please, I'm asking all the attendees, please take a look at the Survey Monkey in the chat. It's in regards to evaluating the program tonight. So please complete the program evaluation that is located in the chat box. All right. So the next question is, should we consider registering as a unaffiliated?
That again is a personal question, because how you register is not so much important as how you cast your vote. We know that in the last census, in the last Congress, the 116th Congress, Republicans in North Carolina accounted for about 30% of the registration. Only 30% of people registered in North Carolina were Republicans. But when you look at the congressional delegation, 13 House people and 2 US senators, 80% of our delegation was Republicans. 30% registration and 80% participation. So it really doesn't matter in the long run how you affiliate yourself, whether it be Democrat, Republican, unaffiliated, or independent. It really doesn't matter. Libertarian, it doesn't matter. Make sure you go out and cast your vote for the person you think will best help you and your family.
Next question. Will we have early voting in the upcoming election, or is that being challenged as well?
There is still a challenge. The Democrats have not given up all of their challenges yet. And the final shoe has not dropped yet in terms of the State Board of Elections coming out along with court cases and saying how all of these measures have been handled. The pieces about precinct locations, early voting, voter ID, so many other things that the legislature in North Carolina has attempted to change from the way it used to be. The final bell has not rung yet. So stay tuned. Stay tuned in for more decisions.
The next question asks for an advice. Ms. Jones asks, a lot of my peers have told me they don't vote because they feel like their vote doesn't matter. Any advice on convincing them that their vote does matter?
Well, I answer that with a question. I want somebody, I've heard that in many cases when I was teaching, some of my students used to tell me the same thing. And I would ask him, please tell me the upside of not voting. And nobody has managed to give me a good answer for that. Tell me the positive side. What do you gain for not voting? When you vote, you send messages even before a vote is cast. Candidates look at groups, they look at constituents, and they say, if I make this decision, that group is not going to like it. And they vote all the time. So I might as well do something different. But if they look at what you like or don't like and say it doesn't matter because you don't show up at the poll, they won't vote or make decisions in your interest. So what you have to do is show lawmakers and decision makers that you will remember them when it comes time to vote. And you have to go out and vote. You have to show them your past indicates your future. It indicates what you will probably do. So you're doing some things today by voting that's helping people 2, 4, 10, 15 years down the road. You're building a history of people getting out and actively participating in the electoral process. So help us build that history. You got to vote.
This is a friendly reminder. Please complete our post-event survey, which is located in the chat. Do we have any more questions for the presenter?
Dr. Stanberry just shared.
Can you read her question for me, Sarah Kimball?
Since 1992, we've seen 2 majority-minority districts in North Carolina. What are the changes that there will be 3 African-American members from North Carolina or the creation of a majority-minority Hispanic district?
The last 2, Dr. Stanberry, are good. There's a possibility. Hispanic voters are on the rise. And there could be 3 African Americans in the North Carolina congressional delegation based on what happens in the 13th and 14th districts, based on what's going on there, along with what we already have. So you don't know yet. People resign and do things differently all the time. That's a great question, Dr. Stanberry. Thank you so much. But the probability is good. I think that there could be a language question dealing with whether or not these people are appropriately represented in our congressional delegation, and a majority-minority district could be set aside for language purposes to have a Hispanic in the delegation. That's a very good possibility.
Any additional questions, anyone? Again, we really appreciate you all coming out during this time and asking these wonderful questions. If we don't have any more questions, then we're gonna go to move to upcoming events. So any more questions? Okay, so we're gonna move. We have some great upcoming events. Again, our chair, Christy Davis Uwat, is hard at work and she is putting things into motion. We have Your Vote Matters. It is a voter registration drive kickoff at Pitt Community College Clock Tower. They will meet April 2nd at 10 a.m. And we will be looking at some of the more rural areas: Belvoir, Bethel, Falkland, Farmville, Grimesland, Pactolus, Simpson. And so this is also in collaboration with the HBCU Coalition of Pitt County. Okay, and you can find these events on our website as well. And then we also have a virtual town hall meeting, as Mr. Atkinson stated. May 17th is the primary. So we're trying to go ahead and get that vote out again. So there's a virtual town hall meeting that will occur April 25th at 6:30 p.m. You can go ahead and start registering as of April 1st. And again, this will be on our website as well as of tomorrow. And as many of you know, we are celebrating our 25th anniversary, or our silver anniversary. We have an all-white party. We will have a DJ, a band, food trucks. We are also still looking for vendors, jewelry, clothing. So it will be May 1st, 2 to 7 p.m. It will be a really great time. And we hope you all will be able to join us. The next slide, we actually have a QR code, and you can go ahead and click that QR code to go ahead and sign up for it if you are interested. And again, this will be on our website as well. So we'll give you a minute to click on that. And okay. And then again, this will be on our website, and you can contact any soror if you're interested in attending. And again, we just want to thank you all, and I want to go ahead and pass it on to our president, Dr. Patty Sanders Smith, if she has any additional comments, but thank you.
Thank you, Sarah Kimball. First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Atkinson for the presentation tonight. He has given us a lot of information. He's given us a lot to think about. He's actually given us some marching orders, some things that we need to do to make sure we get the vote out. I do hope you will be mindful of the events that we have coming up. We would love to collaborate with any community organization that would like to collaborate with us, because we know that this election, 2022, is a crucial election. And we need to get boots on the ground, and we need to get as many people as we can registered and make sure they go and vote. Again, I'd like to thank you for your participation. I'd like to thank Mr. Atkinson again. And if you have any further questions or comments, please put them in the chat for us. Make sure that you do the evaluation, because that will help us in our planning. And if there are not any other questions or comments, again, we thank you for participating. And please visit our website. As you see, the Pitt County Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta is very busy. We're going to have lots of events, and we hope to see you at more of our events. Thank you again for your participation, and have a great rest of your evening. Thank you, everyone.
Can we do an emoji applause from Mr. Atkinson real quick?
Yes,
Thank you again, Mr. Atkinson.
Okay, enjoyed it and really did. Thank you.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you.